Welcome back to Learning English Every Day. Today, we share The $2 Miracle, a story about how a small choice on a dark night can change a life forever. My name is David. 10 years ago, I was 25 years old. In those days, I was not successful. I did not have a factory with machines that roared like lions. I did not have a car that shone in the sun. I did not have a house with a beautiful garden. I was just a young man with an empty stomach and a heavy heart. It was a cold Friday night in the middle of November. The sky was not black, it was a deep bruised purple. The clouds were heavy and thick, like a wet blanket over the city. The rain was not falling softly. It was screaming against the tall glass buildings. The wind was blowing from the north, cold and sharp. It felt like 1,000 tiny needles hitting my face. It was the kind of rain that makes you feel very small. It was the kind of rain that makes you feel like the world has forgotten you. I was walking down a narrow street in the center of the city. The street lights were flickering, trying to stay alive in the storm. My shoes were old and the leather was thin like paper. They had holes in the bottom that I tried to cover with cardboard. But cardboard is no match for a November storm. Every time I stepped on the wet pavement, cold water entered my shoes. Squish, squish, squish. My feet were so cold that I could no longer feel my toes. I was shivering so hard that my teeth made a clicking sound. My hands were pushed deep into my pockets, searching for warmth that wasn't there. That morning my life had changed. I used to work in a large gray warehouse. I moved heavy wooden boxes from one side of the room to the other. My back was always sore. My arms were always tired. But I was happy because I had a job. But that morning, the boss called us all together. He did not look into our eyes. He looked at the floor. "I am sorry," he said. "The economy is bad. The warehouse is closing today. There is no more work." He gave me my very last pay. It was a small amount of money, just a few bills. I went back to my tiny apartment. I paid my rent for the month. I paid the electricity bill so I could have a little light. And after I paid everything, I looked at what was left. I reached into my pocket as I walked through the rain. I felt a single piece of paper. I pulled it out under a dim, yellow street lamp. It was a $2 bill. Only $2. It was old and very wrinkled. One of the corners was slightly torn from being folded too many times. This was all I had left in the entire world. This was my dinner for tonight. This was my breakfast for tomorrow. This was the only thing standing between me and the darkness. "Just $2, I whispered to the wind. The wind did not answer. It only blew more cold rain into my eyes. 5. The golden island in the dark. I saw a light ahead of me. It was a small convenience store on a quiet corner. The windows were bright and glowing with a warm yellow light. In the middle of the dark, wet street, that store looked like a golden island. It was an island of warmth in a cold, dark ocean. I could see the steam on the glass windows. I could see the rows of bread and the cans of hot soup. I could see the coffee machine, puffing out small clouds of white steam. My stomach made a low, angry sound. It felt like it was trying to eat itself. I had not eaten anything since yesterday morning. I was so hungry that my head felt light. I was so hungry that the world felt like a dream. $2, I said to myself. $2 is enough for a hot cup of noodles. $2 is enough for a piece of bread and a small hot coffee. The thought of something warm entering my body made me feel alive again. I could almost taste the salt of the soup. I could almost feel the heat of the cup against my frozen fingers. I walked faster toward the store. I wanted to get out of the wind. I wanted to be in the light. I reached the door. The metal handle was cold and wet in my hand. I was ready to push it open. I was ready to spend my last $2. But then I saw him. Six. The shivering shadow by the trash. He was sitting on the wet concrete right next to a blue trash can. He was not a big man. He looked small, as if the cold was trying to make him disappear. He was wearing a jacket that was much too large for him. The jacket was soaked with rain and heavy with mud. His hair was long and gray, sticking to his forehead in wet lines. He did not have a blanket. He did not have an umbrella. He was just sitting there, letting the rain hit his body. He was holding a small, empty plastic cup in his hands. His hands were shaking so hard that the cup made a tiny sound against the ground. Click, click, click. It sounded like a heart that was about to stop. He did not look up at me. He did not ask me for a penny. He did not say a word. He just stared at the wet ground between his feet. His eyes were not just sad. They were empty. They looked like the eyes of a man who had reached the end of his road. They looked like the eyes of a man who was waiting for the light to go out forever. I stopped moving. The wind blew a cloud of freezing rain into my neck. I looked at the store door. Inside, people were warm. Inside, there was soup and coffee. Then I looked at the man. His skin was a pale ghost-like blue. He was shivering so hard that his whole body was vibrating. I realized something in that moment. For me, this was a very bad night. But for him, this was a battle for his life. I was hungry, yes. But he was dying. A battle began inside my heart. It was a battle between two different versions of me. The first David was hungry. The first David was tired of being poor. He said, "Go inside, David. You worked hard for this money. You moved heavy boxes all day long. You deserve a hot meal. You cannot save the world with $2. If you give him the money, you will have nothing. You will be the one sitting in the rain tomorrow. Take care of yourself first." But then the second David spoke. This David was quiet. This David was the voice of my soul. He said, "Look at his hands, David. Look at his eyes, he has no one. He is a human being just like you. He is someone's son. He might have been someone's father once. $2 is just paper to you, but it is a life to him. If you don't help him tonight, who will?" I looked at the wrinkled bill in my hand. It was so small. It was so old. But in that moment, it felt as heavy as a mountain of gold. It felt like the most important thing I had ever owned. The rain continued to fall. The man by the trash can made a small, broken sound. It was a soft, wet cough. He leaned his head against the cold wall. He looked like he was about to fall asleep in the rain. And I knew that if he fell asleep tonight, he might never wake up. 8. The gift of the soul. I made my choice. I did not go into the store. I turned away from the warm, yellow light. I walked toward the man in the shadows. The water in my shoes felt colder than ever before. But my chest felt strangely warm. I knelt down in the wet mud next to him. I did not care about my pants. I did not care about the rain on my back. I reached out and I took his cold, shaking hand. His skin felt like ice. It felt like the touch of a long, dark winter. I placed the wrinkled $2 bill into his palm. I closed his thin, weak fingers around it. "Please," I said to him. My voice was a little shaky, but it was kind. "Go inside that store right now. Buy yourself a cup of hot soup. Buy some bread. Eat something warm." The man did not move at first. Then he slowly looked at the bill in his hand. He saw the torn corner. He looked up at me. His eyes were no longer empty. They were wide with shock. They were full of a light that I had never seen before. He tried to speak. His lips moved, but no sound came out. He looked at the store, then he looked back at me. He gripped the bill so tightly that his knuckles turned white. "Thank you," he whispered. The words were very, very small. But they were louder than the storm around us. They were the most beautiful words I had ever heard. I stood up. I did not have a penny now. I was going to be hungry tonight. I was going to be hungry tomorrow. But as I walked away into the darkness, I did not feel cold. The rain was still falling. The wind was still blowing. But I felt a bright, burning light inside my chest. I walked home in the dark. My stomach was empty. But my soul was completely full. I did not know his name. He did not know mine. But in that moment, we were brothers. I did not know it then. But I had just planted a miracle. A seed that would wait in the dark for 10 long years. A seed that was about to change my life in a way I could never imagine. 10 years passed by like a fast and heavy river. A decade is a long time for a human heart. It is enough time to build a mountain or to lose a world. For me, those 10 years were a blur of sweat, noise, and constant running. I did not stay in that dark and cold place for very long. The memory of that rainy night stayed with me like a small, warm candle in my pocket. Whenever I felt like giving up, I remembered the man's shaking hands. I remembered the weight of those last $2 in his palm. I told myself, if you could save a life with $2, imagine what you could do with 1,000. I worked every job I could find in this giant, stone city. I washed dishes in hot, loud kitchens until my hands were red and sore. I carried heavy stones on construction sites until my back felt like it would break in half. I worked while the city slept. I worked while others were laughing in bars. I slept in a tiny room with no windows, saving every single penny I earned. I did not buy new shoes, even when the rain came back. I did not go to the movies with friends. I did not eat in fancy restaurants with white tablecloths. I was a man on a mission. I was building a road out of the deep mud. Every dollar I saved felt like a brick for my future. Slowly, the numbers in my bank account began to grow like a young tree. I started a small business in a dark, rented garage on the edge of town. At first, it was just me and one old secondhand machine. The machine was loud and it smelled of hot oil and heavy iron. It was not a beautiful place, but it was mine. I worked 18 hours every single day. I ate my cold dinner while the machine was humming and shaking the floor. Then the day came when I hired my first worker. I remember the feeling of pride when I shook his hand. I remember the weight of the air when I paid his very first salary. I felt like a leader. I felt like I was finally a part of the real world. 5 years later, the small garage was gone. In its place stood a real factory made of brick and glass. It was a large building with high ceilings and bright, white lights. We made small metal parts for the engines of cars. I loved the sound of that factory more than any music. Thump, thump, thump. It was the steady heartbeat of my success. It was the song of my victory over that cold, rainy night. I was no longer the boy with holes in his thin shoes. I was Mr. David, the owner of the factory. I was a man of importance in the city. I was a man with a bright and golden future. With my success, I did one thing that meant everything to my soul. I bought back the old wooden house where my parents used to live. It was a small house with a white wooden fence and a green garden. It was the house where I learned to take my first steps. It was the house where my mother sang to me when the moon was high. For many years, strangers had lived in those rooms. But now the house was mine again. I fixed the roof with my own hands. I painted the walls a soft, warm cream color that looked like sunlight. I planted new flowers in the garden, just like my mother used to do. That house was my anchor in the noisy, gray sea of the city. I thought I had finally reached the top of the mountain. I thought the storm was over for the rest of my life. I sat in my large office, looking at my reflection in the glass windows. I saw a man in a sharp, expensive suit. I saw a man with a gold watch that told the perfect time. I saw a man who had everything a person could want. But I did not realize that when you stand on a mountain top, the wind is even stronger. I did not realize that a kingdom built on stone can still fall in a single day. I was so busy looking at the sun that I did not see the clouds coming. 3 years ago, the sky of the world changed again. It was not a storm of rain this time, but a storm of money and fear. A great economic crisis hit the world like a sudden, freezing winter. The news on the television was full of men in suits with worried faces. The red lines on the computer screens were falling faster than a heartbeat. The big car companies stopped calling my office. They stopped buying our metal parts. We don't need them anymore, the voices on the phone said. Wait for a few months, they said. Maybe later, they whispered. But a factory is not a machine that you can just turn off. A factory is like a living thing, it needs to be fed every day. I looked at my machines, the lions of my kingdom. One by one, they became silent and cold. The workers stopped laughing during their lunch breaks. They stood in small groups, whispering about their families and their rent. I could see the fear in their eyes when they looked at me. It was a fear I knew very well from my own past. It was the deep, dark fear of having nothing left. I tried to fight the cold wind with everything I had. I used all my own savings to pay the workers. I sold my expensive car. I stopped taking a salary for myself for many months. But the hole in the ground was getting deeper every single day. The silence in the factory was becoming louder than the machines ever were. The factory became a very quiet and lonely place. The silence was not peaceful, it was a heavy, ancient silence. It felt like being inside a tomb that was waiting to be closed. The air no longer smelled of hot oil and the energy of production. It smelled of dust, old paper, and the smell of waiting. I spent every night alone in my small office. The lights were dim because I wanted to save every cent for electricity. I sat at a desk that was covered in white and brown envelopes. They were not letters from friends or family. They were letters from the bank and the government. They were final notices printed on thick, hard paper. The words were printed in large, black letters that felt like knives. Overdue, immediate action required, legal action will be taken. Every letter felt like a heavy stone being placed on my chest. I owed money to the people who gave me the machines. I owed money for the heat and the water. I owed a mountain of money to the big bank in the city. One night, a letter arrived that finally broke my spirit into pieces. It was not about the factory or the machines. It was about my house, the house with the white fence. The bank was going to take the garden and the memories of my mother. You have 7 days to pay, the letter said in cold words. After 7 days, the house no longer belongs to you. I sat in the dark for hours, unable to move. I looked at the old photo of my parents on my desk. I felt like I had failed them in the worst way possible. I felt like a failure to my workers who had trusted me. I felt like a failure to the 25-year-old boy I used to be. The 10 years of hard work felt like a long, beautiful lie. The miracle I thought I had built was disappearing like smoke in a storm. I walked out of the silent factory into the deep night. It was raining again, just like it was 10 years ago. It was a gray, freezing rain that felt like needles on my skin. I did not have an umbrella. I did not care about getting wet or getting sick anymore. I walked through the streets for hours without a plan or a destination. My legs took me back to the old part of the city. I found myself standing in front of the building where the convenience store used to be. The store was gone now, replaced by a cold office for a law firm. But the sidewalk was exactly the same as I remembered. The concrete was still there, dark and wet from the pouring rain. I stood on the exact spot where I had knelt in the mud 10 years ago. I looked at my hands in the dim light of a street lamp. They were clean and soft now, the hands of a successful manager. But inside, I felt like the shivering man with the plastic cup. I was the one who was empty and hollow now. I was the one who was waiting for the light to go out forever. Where is the miracle? I shouted at the tall, dark buildings. I gave my last $2 when I had nothing. I worked until my hands bled and my back broke. Why is the world taking everything back from me now? I felt a wave of hot anger in my heart against the universe. I felt like kindness was just a trick we tell to children. I felt like the world only belongs to the cold, the cruel, and the fast. I went back to my office and sat in the darkness. I closed my eyes and I was ready to sign the papers and disappear. I did not know that my name was being spoken in a building across the city. I did not know that a black car was already driving through the heavy rain. I did not know that the seed I planted was finally breaking through the stone. I thought it was the end of my story. But the universe was just preparing for the return of the light. The final morning arrived with a cold and gray sun that did not bring any warmth. It was the morning I had to sign the papers that would end my life's work. The air in the office was heavy with the smell of old paper and the dust of broken dreams. The lawyers from the bank were already waiting for me in the conference room. They did not look at my face, they only looked at the black clocks on the wall. The conference room felt like a hospital room where hope comes to die. The long table was made of dark, polished wood that felt like a bridge to nowhere. I sat at the head of the table, feeling smaller than I had ever felt. I looked at the documents piled in front of me, hundreds of pages of legal words. These were the words that would take away my factory. These were the words that would take away the house of my parents. The room was so quiet that I could hear my own heart beating against my ribs. Thump, thump, thump. It was a slow and heavy sound, like the footsteps of someone leaving forever. My hands were cold and my palms were wet with the sweat of fear. I reached for the simple plastic pen on the table. It felt as heavy as a mountain made of lead. Mr. David, the lead lawyer said without looking up from his files. We are ready for your signature on the final documents. Once you sign these, the debt will be considered settled through the loss of assets. I looked at the line where I had to sign my name. I saw the address of my parents' house, the white fence, the green garden. My vision became blurry for a moment. My hand began to shake so hard that I had to grip the table to stay steady. I was about to lose every single thing I had built in 10 long years. The silence in the room was like a ghost sitting next to me. But just as the tip of the pen touched the white paper, the heavy door opened. It did not open slowly or quietly. It opened with a loud and confident sound that filled the room. The lawyers all looked up at once, their faces full of surprise. A man walked into the room and the air seemed to change. The man was tall and he moved with a quiet, dangerous power. He was wearing a black suit that looked like it cost more than my entire office. The fabric was perfect, the shoes were shining like mirrors. But it was not his clothes that stopped my heart. It was his eyes. They were a deep, clear blue, like the ocean on a summer day. He looked at the lawyers with a gaze that made them look small. Then he turned his head and he looked directly at me. There was a small, gentle smile on his face, a smile I felt I had seen in a dream. Wait, he said, and his voice was low, but it filled the whole room. The lawyers stood up immediately, their voices full of sudden respect and fear. Mr. Knight, they said together. We did not know you were coming to the factory today. We were told you were in the city for a much larger project. The man did not look at the lawyers, he did not even acknowledge their presence. He walked directly toward me, his footsteps firm and steady on the carpet. He stood across from me at the long wooden table. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small, expensive leather wallet. Slowly, he took out a tiny, transparent plastic bag that was sealed tight. He placed it on top of the bankruptcy papers that were waiting for my signature. I looked down at the bag and my breath caught in my throat. Inside the bag was a piece of paper that did not belong in this expensive room. It was very old, yellowed by time and worn at the edges. It was wrinkled as if it had been folded and unfolded 1,000 times. And I saw the most important detail: one of the corners was torn. I felt the air leave my lungs as if someone had punched me in the chest. The room began to spin around me, and the faces of the lawyers disappeared. I saw the torn corner. I saw the same wrinkle I had touched with my frozen fingers 10 years ago. It was my $2 bill. It was the bill I had given to a shivering stranger on a wet, black sidewalk. I looked at Mr. Knight, and for a second the expensive suit was gone. In its place I saw a thin man with wet hair and empty eyes. I saw the plastic cup shaking in his hand. I saw the gray rain falling on his tired shoulders. I looked at his strong, clean hands on the table. They were the same hands that had once gripped that bill like a life jacket. You, I whispered, and my voice was so thin I could barely hear it myself. The man by the trash can. On that Friday night, Mr. Knight nodded slowly, and the smile in his eyes grew warmer. He sat down in the leather chair across from me, looking like a brother. 10 years ago I was a ghost, he began, and his voice was full of memory. I was a man who had reached the end of the road and was waiting for the light to go out. I had no food, no home, and no reason to wake up the next day. The freezing rain was not just on my skin, it was freezing my heart. Then a young man appeared out of the dark. He did not look at me with disgust, he did not walk past me. He knelt down in the mud and he shared his only hope with me. He gave me his last $2, his only chance to have a dinner. Mr. Knight touched the plastic bag with a finger that was now steady and strong. I went inside that convenience store that night, David. I bought a hot soup and I sat in the corner where it was warm. That soup did not just give me calories, it gave me the strength to believe. It told me that I was still a human being because another human saw me. The next day, I found a small job cleaning the floors of a shop. Then I found another job and then another. I never spent this bill, David. I kept it as my map. Whenever I felt like quitting, I looked at this torn corner. I told myself, someone believed in you when you were nothing. You must build a world where you can find him and pay him back. Mr. Knight looked at the lawyers, and his gaze was now cold and sharp. I am buying this factory today, he said, and his voice was like iron. Every debt is paid in full, and every machine belongs to the company again. And I am buying Mr. David's house back from the bank. But I am not the owner of this factory, and I am not the owner of that house. Mr. David is the owner, as he has always been. The lawyers looked at each other in complete shock, their mouths open. They had never seen a transaction like this in their entire careers. I looked at the check Mr. Knight pushed toward the bank's lawyers. The numbers on the check were huge, much more than I ever owed. Why, I asked, and the tears were now running down my face. This is so much more than $2. I don't understand, Mr. Knight leaned forward, and the smile was now a light that filled the room. In the world of business we call this interest, he said softly. But in the world of the human soul, we call this the harvest. You planted a seed in the mud 10 years ago, David. I am just the fruit that grew from that one small seed. You gave me my life back on a rainy night. Today I am just giving you yours back. He stood up and reached across the dark wooden table to shake my hand. His hand was warm, strong, and full of the power of a life reborn. It was no longer the hand of a shadow or a ghost. It was the hand of a friend. It was the hand of a brother. 1 week later, the golden sun was shining on the factory's metal roof. I stood on the production floor, surrounded by the smell of oil and new metal. I reached for the main power switch, the same switch that had been off for months. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and I pulled it down. Vroom! The machines woke up with a deep, powerful roar that shook the floor. The dust was blown away by the energy of the moving parts. The lights on the machines turned green, one by one, like stars waking up. My workers were back, wearing their clean blue uniforms and big smiles. They were laughing, they were talking, they were moving with purpose. The factory was no longer a tomb of silence, it was a home of activity. That evening I walked back to my parents' old house. I touched the white wooden fence, and it felt like a part of my own body. I looked at the green garden, and I saw the flowers starting to bloom. I realized that I was no longer a machine that was running out of oil. I was a man who understood the secret heartbeat of the universe. I took the yellow $2 bill and I put it in a gold frame. I hung it on the wall of my office, right above my desk where I could see it. Every time I feel stressed, I look at that torn corner and I remember the rain. Every time I see someone shivering in the street, I stop my car. I reach into my pocket and I plant a new seed in the world. Thank you for listening to The $2 Miracle on Learning English Every Day. This story is a reminder that kindness is a flame that never goes out. When you light someone else's candle, you never lose your own light. You only make the world a little brighter for everyone, including yourself. And one day when you are lost in the dark, that light will find its way back home. It might take a day or it might take 10 long years. But kindness is a circle that always completes itself. Practice these words with me today: redemption, harvest, interest, miracle. I will see you in the next story. Keep your heart open to the magic of the world. Goodbye.